All right, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So thank you again to everyone for showing up tonight for our Monday Guest Speaker Series. My name is Shannon Sheehy, and I run the careers team here at CodeU. We have an excellent team of career coaches, technical project managers, an employer relationship management person who helps you all with the job seeking portion of the program. So if you're newer to the program, you may not have gotten to know us very well yet, but you will. And we also host this guest speaker series. Our goal with this series is to help you all get acquainted with new people and new topics in tech that either build on our curriculum or are collaborative with our curriculum to get you all in front of some new topics. So I hope if this is your first time, that I think you will really enjoy it. But I definitely see a lot of returners, so I am glad to see folks coming back for more. I think it's a really great series. Our careers team is always trying to work on fun and engaging events for you all to attend. So keep an eye out on Slack for more information on those. Next week is the SOAR Summit in Eastern Kentucky out in Corbin. The SOAR team was really gracious to give us a free promo code that's just code U. So if you would like to attend, you can use that to attend for free. There is a career fair portion. It is not tech specific, but you are welcome to attend that as well. We are also working on some events of our own, so keep an eye out for that in Slack and then in our Tech Careers newsletter if you're a graduate. If you are part of the May cohort, so folks that just entered their pathway within the last month or so, if you're attending for your tech event, please remember to fill out the form in your From Code to Career Readiness curriculum in Open Class. And then just a few housekeeping items. So please keep yourself muted. If you have any questions, you can throw those in chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and then at the end, we usually have time for questions. So we'll make sure we get to those then. And if you need anything throughout, again, just throw it in chat, and I will be happy to answer. I will be around for the duration of the evening. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dave Hatter, who is going to present on cybersecurity. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in, share my screen, and we'll see if we can't get this thing going here. And hopefully this will all just conveniently cooperate like it did when we tested it. All right. All right. Excellent. So let me get my PowerPoint window here. So again, Dave Hatter. I live in Northern Kentucky. I work for an Ohio-based company. Spent about 30 plus years in the industry, most of it as a software engineer, the last 7 or 8 more focused explicitly on cybersecurity, and primarily because when I saw the sort of sordid state of affairs in software and the fact that there was little attention paid to security, including by myself up until about 7 or 8 years ago, started to get me thinking about how important it would be to get folks, whether they're in tech or not, to think about as we become increasingly digital in society, that, this stuff impacts us all, whether it's, critical infrastructure or your bank or whatever. Increasingly everything is digital, everything is interconnected. We rely on this stuff every day. And I'm going to show you some examples here of some things I've seen, the things that we see as a business every day. So that's a little bit more about me. I won't read all that stuff to you. So let's set the table here a little bit. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Statista, this is a great resource for anything statistics related. You can see they used a variety of different data sources, including data from the FBI, to put this chart together. Obviously, as you look out into the future, there's some speculation there, but it doesn't really matter where you look. Microsoft, Google, FBI, DHS, wherever, you tend to see a hockey stick-like spike upward in terms of cybersecurity-related attacks. These attacks are not only more frequent, but they tend to be a lot more impactful, again, partially because we're super interconnected, and I would argue that where there's still not much focus in the software industry, particularly around the Internet of Things, which I'm going to talk about explicitly in terms of privacy and security. So, but again, that's a lot of this is speculation here. I think this is a lot more interesting. This is actual claims data from insurance companies that write cyber insurance policies. So it's one thing for tinfoil hat people like me or people trying to sell you something in the cybersecurity space to tell you all the terrors that you need to care about. This is actual claims data from an insurance company coalition that writes cyber insurance policies. So you can kind of get a taste of that. And then you can see also from Coalition, again, actual claims data. So again, I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, and I'm going to go pretty quick to try to get all this in at the time we have allotted here. But if you have questions, feel free to throw them out as we go along. If you have a particularly insightful story, feel free to throw it out. It's always better when folks hear from other people that have experienced these things rather than just me talking about it. And I'll share this slide deck with Shannon, so you guys can have this at the end if you want it, because I do have a lot of resources linked in here. Here's a pretty alarming headline. My company thrived for 150 years, and Russian hackers brought it down in 3 months. I could easily spend the whole hour just talking about stories like this. And I'm sure since you guys are all in tech, you probably at least follow this somewhat. You're seeing some of these things yourselves. So, our company is a managed services provider. We provide outsourced IT services and cybersecurity protection for small and mid-sized companies kind of throughout the region, Northern Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus. And we see these kind of things every day. Now, honestly, and again, I'll get into some of the more specific details in a minute, we don't see lots of real sophisticated attacks on these organizations. What we see is a lot of account takeovers and things where companies, especially smaller companies that have limited resources, don't believe these things will happen to them, aren't seeing this kind of news, think this is all just fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and tinfoil hat Dave Hatter and people like me telling them this stuff, so that they'll spend money. But again, I could tell you, and I am going to share some stories of devastating attacks we've seen, but most of what we're seeing currently across our roughly 200 customer base is a lot of just basic cyber hygiene things people aren't doing, making it easy for the bad guys. Here's another example. Now, this was a hospital chain based out of Dayton, Ohio. My guess is you may not have seen much news about this down in the Lexington media market. It was pretty big news here in Greater Cincinnati and particularly in Dayton. So you can see a major hospital network faces system-wide tech outage due to cybersecurity attack. So, and when I talk to people about these things, these are the kind of things I'm trying to point out about as we're increasingly interconnected. These things affect us all. If you have a medical emergency and you're on the way to this site and the site's down and they can't provide care for you and they have to transfer you to another site, I mean, that could be, could cause more significant injury or possibly even death. There is a documented case in Germany where a hospital had a ransomware attack and a patient had to be transferred to another hospital and they died on the way. Kettering Health here in particular was down, and some systems were down for weeks. So, even if there wasn't any direct patient impact, think of the cost of that. You have a hospital full of expensive doctors, nurses, et cetera, standing around unable to provide care. You have patients that need care, they're in pain, they're potentially in life-threatening situations, and they can't get the care they need because of a ransomware attack. And another thing that I think is often overlooked by consumers and people who perhaps don't follow this as closely as nerds like me, is your data is everywhere now, right? And people will say all the time, well, Davey, I don't care about any of this stuff. I got nothing to hide. My data is already out there. And, I understand that philosophy, but I'm going to try to encourage you, even though I'm not going to focus a lot on privacy tonight, is to start thinking about how can you limit your footprint of the data that's available about you out there. Because as more and more of stories like this hit the news, there are these massive treasure troves of consumer data available to the bad guys, and that allows them to do one of two things. A, create very, very realistic attacks on you because they have information about you that allow them to appear to be a legitimate agency, like the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department or the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office or whatever. Or vice versa, because they have all this data, it makes it easy for them to impersonate you and take out credit in your name and that sort of thing. So, there's a perfect storm of all kinds of different things happening that are driving us into this sort of tsunami of cybercrime that we're seeing today. And all of this data that's being leaked, being stolen, et cetera, it just feeds into all of that. And then finally, we're kind of gotten to a place where, and I love this graphic, your keyboard is kind of like a grenade, right? Especially if you work in the critical infrastructure sector, you can click the wrong link. Next thing you know, there's some ransomware. And there are documented examples like the Oldsmore water plant where hackers were able to get in and change the amount of chemicals going into the water system there. So, I don't lie awake at night worrying about these things, but I'm very seriously concerned about critical infrastructure. The FBI defines 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, things like, electric plants, chemical plants, water plants, that sort of thing. The attacks are increasing on this. You may have seen in the news, there's been all kinds of concern about Chinese Communist Party hackers getting in the telecom system, which obviously all this traffic is going through as well. So, we are in an increasingly precarious situation where all of our systems depend on this stuff. And, you still have, and I'd be curious to hear from you guys, especially at the end when we get to the question and answer section, if not before, what you're seeing out there. But I just find that the vast majority of people I'm talking to about this every day, prospects we're talking to, they just don't take this stuff seriously until something tragic happens to them or someone they know. And unfortunately, this stuff is all very real. So a couple other last things about, why is this all happening now? Again, trying to set the table, because we'll ease into the common threats that we see and the things you need to be on the lookout for, and then what you can do about all these things. So you may have seen this infographic before. It comes out every year. It shows how much activity there is taking place over the internet every minute of the day. Obviously, this is an estimate. No one can really say this for sure. But if you look at this year over year, you can see, the graphic goes up every year. And I would ask you all anecdotally, who here spends less time online than last year? I would bet there's not a one of you. Who here does not have a smartphone? Who here does not bank online? Who here does not educate themselves online? The list is endless, and increasingly we're all spending more and more time online. There are new services that come online. Each one of these things creates new attack vectors, and sadly, the bad guys are very smart, very creative, very devious. They'll go where the people are. They'll tell any lie. They're expert con artists in many cases. And as we do more and more online, as more systems get interconnected, the risk just continues to go up. The Internet of Things, and I mentioned this before, aka so-called smart devices. And I'll just tell you my opinion of all this stuff is it's complete garbage. It's mostly spyware. The incentives for this stuff are totally wrong. Yeah, I understand it's cool and there's a certain wow factor, and some of these devices can make your life more convenient. But the vast majority of these devices have the wrong incentives. They're not designed with your privacy and security in mind. They're designed with speed to market, ease of use, and market share in mind. In some cases, these companies are practically giving this stuff away. You have no idea what the software in it, what kind of backdoors it might have. There's no quality assurance whatsoever. And they have to make these things as easy to use as possible for the average consumer, because if it's not easy to use, who's going to use it, right? So as more and more of these things come online and more things become smart, right? I don't even know if you can buy a so-called, TV that's not smart at this point. All of these things just increase the possible attack vectors. Each one of these is a potential opening that allows the bad guys in. Some of you may be aware there's a search engine called Shodan explicitly designed to find these kinds of things online. And I think this cartoon here, while it's kind of funny, it really drives home my point. I have as little of this stuff as possible. And again, it's not because I'm inherently against it. It's because most of this stuff is just cheap garbage without any thought given whatsoever to your security and privacy. And then take it a step further. I'm a nerd. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I know how to secure these things to the extent they can be secured with things like VLANs. You think the average person knows what a VLAN is? You think the average person has any idea about changing the default password, changing the SSID of something? Do you know there's a study out there that shows, particularly in the smart TV space, most manufacturers that make smart TVs stop providing software updates for the TVs after 2 years. Do you really think the smart Mr. Coffee you have is going to be getting software updates to protect you against security vulnerabilities in that device after 2 years? I can almost guarantee it's not. So again, I'm not going to read all these to you. I think there's some funny things here. This is the one, though, I think that really makes the point, the smoke detector / fire alarm. 30 bucks in Bitcoin, or the next time I smell smoke, I might just let you sleep. So again, trying to set the table. Why are we seeing more of these attacks? Why is this happening now? Well, we have an ever increasing amount of attack vectors for the bad guys to use as well. You have, we've sort of touched on this already a bit, more data everywhere. Everything is collecting data, including these so-called smart devices. Almost every day there's some gigantic new breach where data is being leaked. All that data, as I mentioned before, is being used against you in a variety of different ways. And then your data has intrinsic value, because again, I will frequently hear, well, Dave, I got nothing to hide. I don't care about any of this stuff. I try to make these points, but even if you don't believe any of the other points, you can see here Experian made this nice infographic that tries to show you what your data is worth on the dark web. So when people tell me I got nothing to hide, your data has intrinsic value above and beyond even the fact that hackers and bad actors are using it in a variety of different ways against you. You've got an ever-changing field of attackers out there, all the way from a recreational person in their mom's basement, all the way out to state-sponsored actors like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, sort of the evil axis of hacking, if you will. they have different incentives, but by any objective measure, you can look, see what the FBI is reporting, IMF, again, some of those earlier statistics. The amount of crime is going up. The amount of money these people are making is insane in many cases. And, in some cases, they're not necessarily after the money, although the FBI has reported that North Korean hackers make about $2 billion a year that they use to run their government from this stuff. Sometimes they're trying to steal trade secrets, sometimes it's military secrets, sometimes it's whatever they can get their hands on. And then to wrap up the how did we get here, well, it's never been easier to be a bad actor in this space. And if you're as old as me, I got into this field. I graduated from college in '92. So I've been doing this for a long time. If I wanted to set up a server and launch some kind of cyber attack or something, I had to make a capital expense. I had to have a lot of knowledge and skill. Well, now I can get free resources online or extremely low cost resources, spin up a server, launch some attacks, tear it down, move it somewhere else, helps me cover my tracks. And I don't really have to have a whole lot of skill or make a large investment. You've got cryptocurrency, right? It's never been easier for the bad guys to get paid through various forms of cryptocurrency, and you have encryption. And while encryption is a powerful tool for the white hat folks, the good guys out there, it's also a powerful tool for the bad guys to help cover their tracks and do their nefarious deeds. And then finally, again, so many people just don't take this stuff seriously. And I understand it to a point, right? You just want to live your life. You don't want to have to know all this stuff. You don't want to have to care about all the bad actors that are out there that are coming at you in every conceivable way, including even in video games now. But this 85% is from a Verizon data breach study. Every year, Verizon and Microsoft and other tech-oriented companies will put out various reports. The Verizon data breach report is very well known. It's a great resource for anyone that cares about security. And they say that roughly 85% of the attacks they see are based on human beings being exploited somehow. They're not super sophisticated attacks where someone figures out how to exploit a hole in the firewall or something like that. They're just phishing and that sort of thing, right? And you can see, if you don't know, Bruce Schneier, very well-known international cybersecurity expert, cryptologist, very interesting guy to follow, lots of great resources. Again, I've got a bunch of links and resources for you at the end of this slide deck. He says, only amateurs attack machines, professional target people. So let's talk about what we're seeing out there. This slide is from Microsoft. I know it's a bit of an eye chart when you try to read it, but they say, based on what they're seeing, and this is from their last report, more than 99% of identity attacks are password attacks, and most of the attacks they're seeing are identity-based. We see tons of account takeovers and man-in-the-middle attacks to try to defeat MFA across our roughly 200 clients out there. That's where most of these things are happening, because people continue to use the same bad passwords across multiple accounts. They don't have MFA turned on, or even if they do, it's not phish-resistant MFA, and bad guys are increasingly coming up with ways to get around MFA. And then, back to the password thing for a second. If you haven't seen this chart, it comes out once a year. I won't read the whole thing to you. Again, it also becomes part of a bit of an eye chart there, but you can see as you increase the length and complexity of a password, and I mean, this is some pretty high-end hardware they're doing these tests on, you go from, I can crack a password even if it's 8 characters long, the number's only, from instantly, to you get down to 12 characters. If it's numbers only, I'm at 3 months. Or if I have, good password guides, they're a quote strong password, numbers, uppercase letters, and symbols, I'm out to 3 billion years. But, I understand that it's difficult to manage 100 different strong, unique passwords. I mean, I get all of the arguments against why people continue to have these bad habits. And again, we'll get to some solutions for all this here in a bit. I think the biggest threat, though, personally at the moment, besides just general bad habits and lack of cyber hygiene, is spoofing. The average person has no idea how easy it is to spoof something, whether it's a whole website, an email address, a phone number. Sadly, almost all the technology that makes the internet work was created in the late 60s and early 70s. TCP/IP, all that sort of stuff is old. Security was not in mind when they created this stuff. Most stuff over the internet doesn't use encryption. It's sent in plain text like email, unless, of course, you retrofit this stuff in. That creates friction, adds difficulty, etc. So again, I see spoofing, especially thanks to AI-driven spoofing, which we're going to look at here in a second, as the single biggest threat, because the average person doesn't know that it's really easy for me right now to go online, find a website, and literally make a phone call or send a text from any number that I type in there. They don't understand how easy it is to spoof an email address and, to the naked eye, make it look incredibly realistic. And I'll show you some examples. So to try to drive this point home, if you start working from the right back to the left, you can see what appears to be a photo of a woman looking out the porthole of an airplane at the wing of an airplane sitting on a tarmac. But as you can see, as you scroll out, actually, it's spoofed, right? She's literally holding up a toilet seat in front of a TV. And then you can see these examples of URLs here, right? The bad guys know the average person doesn't know anything about foreign character sets or anything like that, right? So they go out and register domain names using foreign character sets where there's a very subtle difference in the domain name. The average person doesn't even know this is a thing, much less that they should carefully scrutinize these things. So if you look at the Citibank example here, right? Citibank.com versus Citibank.com, this lower one, and you can see there, it's using acrylic A. Yes, if you look at that carefully and you know this is a thing, you could say, well, okay, something might be up with this. Average person has no clue about this sort of stuff, right? And while there are, some technological tools, things like Cisco Umbrella or DNS filter that can stop some of this stuff, I recently read an article, and I didn't have time to include it in here. NordVPN, before Amazon Prime Day, 2 months before Prime Day, they found 120,000 websites that were set up to take advantage of people around Prime Day. Scam sites, 120,000 in less than 2 months, basically trying to scam people around Prime Day. So, this, again, it's easy to do. It doesn't take much skill. The bad guys know this, and you're really in an asymmetric battle against them, unfortunately. So here's a couple other examples of spoofing. I mentioned in my notes there, my spare time, I'm the mayor of a city in Northern Kentucky, Fort Wright. So here's an example of spoofing that was not done very well. But again, it shows you the creativity. Now, again, you can see this goes back a ways. Someone took the time to go out and figure out that I'm the mayor of Fort Wright and that Jeff Bethel is our public works director. Okay, that's easy to find between our public website or LinkedIn. You could easily find both of these things, right? So they send an email. Again, they used my name and the from. They did not do a very good job of spoofing the email address. You can see it came from a Gmail account. We don't use Gmail. Hey, Jeff is the subject. And then if you look at the grammar here, it's a little off, right? The punctuation's a little weird. The grammar is a little off. Sharp request, need gift cards, yada, yada, yada. And then the signature block is wrong if you actually looked at my signature block. But for someone that doesn't know anything about spoofing, and for someone that isn't skeptical and not vigilant about these things, I could see how you could be fooled by this. Now, I'll tell you, in my role as mayor here, we do lots of cybersecurity training. I talk about this stuff all the time. I warn the team about this all the time. So, I'm trying to create a culture of cybersecurity where people are much less likely to fall for this sort of thing. Again, not a very good job of spoofing, but a real world example. Here's another example. Now, this was directed to my account, my city account. Divorce papers. Looks like it came from an attorney, yada, 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 Keith Booth, blah, blah, blah. My wife wants a divorce. If you knew me, I might get that email while we're on this call. But you can see here that you have a link that I'm supposed to click. And, it's a spoofed email. The whole body of the mail is spoofed. They're using social engineering. They're trying to catch you off guard. They're trying to create some urgency. They're trying to get you to act before you stop and think, right? And then probably most of you, since you're kind of in tech here, know that you can put your mouse over a link and it will show you where the link goes, right? Now, it's no guarantee if the link doesn't go to what it says on the screen that it's illegit, but that's a strong red flag, especially for the average person. And you can see this link goes to add2.passwordland, right? And then some, query string parameters there. So bottom line being, we are getting deluged with this stuff all the time. And I'm sure all of you are seeing these kind of things, whether it's via text, via email, social media. This stuff is everywhere. It's easy for the bad guys to do. So, here's some examples of smishing, text-based phishing attacks. I'm sure you get these all the time. Here's a recent one that I got. Hey, thanks for using Apple Pay. Your account has been automatically charged $1,230.99. Not you. Please call us immediately. Now, I think text-based phishing, aka smishing, is much more dangerous to the average consumer because it's much harder from the naked eye to look at this and know that it's fake. There's no easy way to know whether anything in here is legitimate or not. And my general advice is anytime you get something like this, and like for me, I don't use Apple Pay. Again, tinfoil hat guy. I don't use any of that sort of stuff. So I automatically know this is fake. But to the average person, especially if they have an Apple Pay account, you get the $1,230 charge purportedly. You're probably going to want to look into that, right? And I can almost guarantee this is some boiler room in India or somewhere like that where there are con artists waiting to take this call. And waiting to steal your money. And if you've never seen a site like Kitboga, some of you may have seen Kitboga. He's a scam the scammer guy. He shows these operations in real time and how they'll tell any lies, and he tries to keep them on the phone as long as possible to waste their time. It's very insightful, especially if you have family members that don't believe these kind of things, to have them watch some Kitboga videos, because you can literally in real time watch the scammers tell whatever lie, pivot, whatever way they have to try to get to the money. QR codes. QR codes are another huge problem from the spoofing perspective, because you can't look at a QR code and know what it does. And scammers are increasingly using these not only because they know you can't look at it and know what it does, they know that even advanced email protection often can't resolve what that points at and has no way to try to block it. So this is an email I got at my work account at Intrust with a QR code, supposedly about the employee benefits plan. Now, why in the world, think about this for a second, why in the world would my HR department, my internal HR department, send me an email where I have to get my phone out and scan a QR code to access something? How does that ever make sense, right? It doesn't. And I'd be the first to tell you, I almost never scan a QR code unless I'm, about 99.999% certain it's legit. I just won't do it because there's too much risk there. But again, these are the tactics, and we see these every day. Like you say, this was a spoofed phishing email sent to my email account at work, trying to get me to scan this QR code. And then one last thing I want to talk about here that fits into the spoofing bucket: search engine poisoning. A lot of people don't even realize this is a thing. And I know people personally who have fallen victim to this. Bad guys can, for very little money, go out, set up a spoof website, copy an entire website, register a domain that's one character off or something, and then use search engine optimization techniques and or buy sponsored ads on Google and get ranking that takes you to something bogus. Someone says, oh, I need TeamViewer for a remote connection. Well, I go do a quick search, and this is a real example from Google. Now, look at that URL. TeamViewer download, faster service, blah, 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 something or other, right? It's not going to the TeamViewer website. Does the average person even know that this is a possibility? Do they know that bad guys can go out and pay for ads and get their bogus stuff to rank? Do they know that Google is not and cannot check all of the stuff? Of course they don't. So again, this is why I'm big on this spoofing thing. And then here's a public service announcement from the FBI about criminals using artificial intelligence, deepfake voice cloning, generative AI in general, right? All those old school tells, like the weird text you saw in that email to our public works director, that's all gone now. Any criminal can go use Claude, Perplexity, Grok, Gemini, whatever, to create perfect English prose all day long. So again, it just ratchets up their ability to generate incredibly realistic looking things that make it easier for folks who don't know about these things to fall prey to this, especially if there's a strong social engineering element to it. And then real quick, you probably are not going to be familiar with this guy, but in the Cincinnati media market, there's an investigative reporter named John Matarese. He's been doing this for well over 30 years up here. And he and I cloned his voice. Now, I have a link to this interview. I'd encourage you all to go watch it. Almost 2 years ago, he calls me up and says, hey, Dave, I want to do a story on how generative AI and voice cloning can allow you to create deep fakes that are very realistic. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, and again, this was almost 2 years ago. This technology has rapidly progressed since then. He said, I'll meet you in an hour. In less than an hour, I went out, did a search, found a site that claimed to do this, set up an account, tested it with my own voice. He shows up, and in less than an hour, using a free site with previous experience, and in an hour's time, it asked him to read a statement. We did that a couple times, and if you watch the interview, which I have linked in the links at the end, you can literally see me type in a statement, hit play, and his voice comes out of the speakers. That was 2 years ago. The technology has rapidly progressed since then. So, warning your parents, warning your grandparents, warning your kids that these things are real. And there are all kinds of scams running rampant now. I don't have it in here, but if you haven't seen the story, check out the deepfake voice cloning attack on the Ferrari, the car people, the Ferrari CFO. It's really wild. If you haven't seen Google VO3, this is a great video. I'm not going to play the video for you because it takes too long, but it's basically a 2-minute video of all kinds of AI-generated deepfakes saying, hey, blah, 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 but I'm not real, I'm AI. If you haven't seen it, you can see the quality is very good, and it's really eye-opening for like older folks who don't know about these things, don't believe these things are real. Again, it can be a real eye-opener for folks to help them realize how far this technology has come, how quickly it's progressing, and how easy it is to basically be in a situation where you can't believe your own eyes anymore. So if you haven't seen VO3 and this video in particular, they do a really good job of sort of setting the stage for why you should care about this. And then last, threats, ransomware. We do see some ransomware, but again, across our roughly 200 clients, the vast majority of what we're seeing are account takeovers and some form of phishing. So here's 2 real world attacks. So I've shown you a couple examples. This could have been absolutely devastating. This again goes back to my Fort Wright situation. So someone did a really good job of the spoofing on this. They took the time to figure out that I was the mayor and Joyce Woods, who is now retired, was our city clerk, and she would have access to funds. Okay. So they send her a spoofed email. They have not taken over my account, and we've also switched to a .gov domain since then. But this looks like it is my legitimate email account. Again, they're not in the account. They've just done a good job of spoofing it. They send her an email. Hey, I need to ask a question. How much money do we have in the checking account? Reply as soon as possible. So then she replies, got your message, yada, yada, yada. The balance today is $4,285,000 some odd dollars. So she's just told them we basically have $4 million in our bank account. And they come back with, I need you to initiate 2 wire transfers, one for an international payment and one for a local payment. What else do you need from me, essentially? And at that point, thankfully, she had the good sense to go, why would a small city of 6,500 people in Northern Kentucky ever do an international wire transfer? How would that ever make sense? And thankfully, because again, I'm screaming about this stuff all the time and we do a bunch of training, she picked up the phone, called me on a number that she knew and said, hey, Dave, what's up with this wire transfer thing? And I said, hey, Joyce, there's a blue cord going into the back of your computer. Get your scissors, cut that cord, and I'll be there in 5 minutes and we'll figure out what's going on. So thankfully, we dodged a gigantic bullet with this particular situation here. This is an example from one of our clients, a real world phishing attack, very well done. The person that got this email, and in this case, this was an account takeover. The bad guys got into someone's email account, started sending out emails. Now, again, I realize that's probably a little bit hard to read, but the recipient of this spoofed phishing email had received email from this person before. So there was no real high concern that it might be fake. And again, this is one of the reasons why account takeover can be so powerful for the bad guys. If I can get into your account, I can impersonate you and do virtually anything. So they send out this email. Of course, there's the social engineering angle of, hey, I'm trying to do business with you. Go review this document, right? So 10:47, the email is received. 10:49, the user clicks the link. At 10:50, they're redirected to a Microsoft sign-in page. As you can see, if you look at the URL carefully here, it's spoofed, but the average person doesn't know about this. And to the naked eye, this looks exactly like the real thing, right? So they enter their Microsoft credentials, the threat actors in their account, and at that point, they start creating mailbox rules. This is usually the first thing we see. As soon as they're in, they'll create folders and create mailbox rules so they can now send email and as you receive email back to your account that you don't ever see because the emails are flowing into folders you don't know about. At 10:54, because of some additional technology we've implemented in Microsoft 365, it kicked off an alert. We kicked the bad guys out of the account and so on and so forth. 3 minutes. In 3 minutes time, they were in there, and had that not been caught, there's no telling what might have happened next. Usually what we see in a scenario like that is it eventually involves some kind of financial theft, fake invoices, that sort of thing. So what can you do about all this stuff, right? Hope and denial are definitely not a strategy. And I know if you're not really working in this space, it probably feels like this guy right here with the stuff I've already dumped on you. But I'm going to give you some concrete actionable items that you can take away and use for yourself, as well as share with your family, friends, parents, etc., that will hopefully make them a lot more secure. At the end of the day, there's nothing you can do that will make you completely impervious to this stuff. But what you can do is focus on hardening your systems, improving your cyber hygiene, making yourself a more difficult target, because in most cases, unless you are being explicitly targeted, the bad guys are just going to move on. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit. They're looking for the easy scores, the people that have the same bad passwords on multiple accounts and no MFA. It's kind of like that old joke of, hey, if we're getting chased by a bear, I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just have to be faster than you. And that's always my advice to folks, is to focus on, how can you harden your security posture to the point where you're a very difficult target and the bad guys are most often going to move on. So this slide you're looking at here, also from Microsoft, 2 key points. Outlier attacks make up just 1%, 99% of the attacks are all basic security hygiene. It's people not doing these simple things. They don't have real antivirus. They're not using MFA. So again, this is from Microsoft. You can see the URL there. And again, I have links to all of this stuff, right? They tell you 5 things. If you just do these 5 things, you're going to be more secure than 99%, right? Enable multi-factor authentication, apply zero trust principles, use extended detection response and anti-malware, EDR, XDR, MDR, endpoint protection, antivirus, more or less all the same thing. Apply patches and protect your data, back up your data and test your backups, right? So and we're going to look at each one of these in a little more detail here in a second, because the good news is it's never been easier to do all of these things. And many of these things cost nothing or a very nominal cost, right? So that's what Microsoft says, but they're trying to sell you something. So let's look at what the insurance people are saying, right? Because they're the ones that have to come in and deal with the aftermath of these attacks, right? They're the ones that have to pay the claims out on these things. So what does the insurance folks say? Well, they say endpoint detection and response. Again, MDR, anti-malware, et cetera. Multi-factor authentication. Identity access management and privileged access management. You could argue that falls into the zero trust bucket. Backup procedures and patch management. 4 out of 5 of these exactly line up with Microsoft is saying, and again, with a little bit of leeway, you could argue that 3 fits into the zero trust thing. So you have the people on the front end trying to defend against this stuff, and you have the people on the back end trying to deal with the aftermath, all telling you the same thing. If you focus on these 5 things, you will be vastly more secure than most people. You got to focus on defense in depth, right? Like a medieval castle, you want multiple layers of defense. So if the bad guys get through the first layer, hopefully they get stopped at the second layer. And really, the easiest thing, the best thing, is password hygiene. Make sure that you have a strong, unique password on every account. I know that's painful. That's why you need a password manager. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Passphrase, better than a password. Longer, more complex, always better, but obviously more difficult to remember. At Intrust, we have a company policy for any personal employee account. Well, let's not say personal. For any Intrust employee account, for anything that's business related for you as an employee, you must use 1Password. That's the password manager we've landed on for a variety of reasons, and I can talk about that in more detail later, but I know I'll run out of time if I get too deep into any of these things. But with 1Password, you have an encrypted password vault. It uses zero trust encryption. All I need to know is one ridiculous password. So I have, obviously that's not the password for it, but I have one ridiculous passphrase that unlocks my 1Password account. I've got multi-factor authentication turned on there. It makes it really easy for me to create and manage strong, unique passwords across all my accounts. Then I also have a personal 1Password vault. So my Intrust vault and my personal vault are different. So all I really need to know are 2 strong, unique passwords, 2 passphrases to unlock my password manager. Again, it uses multi-factor authentication. There's also some additional security measures. That's why we like 1Password. But it's on my phone, it's on my tablet, it's on all my PCs. So wherever I am, I have access to my password vault at all times. And it makes it really easy for me to create insane passwords like you see here. I don't know what my LinkedIn password is. I don't know what my bank account password is. It's the longest, most ridiculous password I could generate. It's stored in the password vault. It automatically gets plugged in when I logged in. Multi-factor authentication. You simply must use multi-factor authentication, aka 2-factor authentication or 2-step verification everywhere that allows it. And for anything that doesn't allow it, I would encourage you to think about dumping that. There are different ways to do MFA. Any MFA is better than no MFA, but I want to take a second here and specifically call out concerns around any sort of voice authentication MFA. Some banks will let you log in using your voice. Well, now, thanks to this deep fake voice cloning stuff, that's a huge problem. Sam Altman just recently gave the CEO of OpenAI just recently gave a presentation to the Fed warning about this very thing. So, even if you don't believe old tinfoil hat Dave here, you now have people like Sam Altman warning about the possible tsunami of fraud coming from deepfake voice cloning, especially around financial fraud. If your bank allows any sort of voice authentication, I cannot encourage you strong enough, turn that off or find a new bank. But most people are familiar with text-based MFA. You get the 6-digit code. It's good for 30 seconds. That's certainly better than nothing. You can use an MFA app, even better, because then it's connected to your phone. For most of my stuff where I'm not using something like a hardware key, you would physically have to possess my device that's got my authenticator app on it, unlock the device, good luck with that, and then open the authenticator app to get the code. Text-based MFA is not encrypted. You can be SIM jacked. Again, there are ways for bad guys to use man-in-the-middle attacks to get this. Authenticator apps tend to be much more phish resistant, but you can also use things like hardware keys or pass keys. Most of you probably at least heard of pass keys. Maybe you're not using them yet. 1Password makes it really easy to store pass keys without getting too deep into the weeds. And this is an article I wrote for a local paper up here about it. If you're not familiar with pass keys, basically it's using public key encryption to create essentially a digital cert. Half of it's stored out there. You have the other half. The public key is out there. You have the private key. And instead of having to enter a password each time, it just hands off your pass key. It's a little more complicated than that. I think this is probably where we're headed with most of these things. Most of the big tech players support this now. You should take a hard look at that because it reduces the friction. And even though there are still some potential problems with it, it's generally a lot more secure than passwords, even with MFA. You got to install the patches on your systems, right? We already talked about this. Microsoft mentioned it. The insurance people are mentioning it. This is so critical. And again, easy to do. And also, let me back up a step. If you buy it, some password managers are free, some have a nominal cost, but a strong password costs you nothing. MFA costs you nothing. Patch management, installing the updates from your software vendors, Microsoft, Apple, whomever, costs you nothing. Now, again, you might spend a little money for a password manager, but everything we've talked about so far is theoretically free or at a nominal cost. Your password manager is going to cost, even if you pay for one, like the higher tier of 1Password, it'll be less than the cost of one Starbucks a month. So again, these are all relatively inexpensive solutions, make you much, much more difficult to hack. But again, going back to the IoT for a second, most people have no idea how to update their IoT devices. And even if they do, in many cases, after a couple of years, there aren't updates coming from the vendor anyway. So patch your devices, endpoint protection, anti-malware, MDR, EDR, XDR, whatever. This is the Gartner Magic Quadrant. If you're not familiar with Gartner, they're a big industry think tank. They basically rate products from just about every vendor and every category you could think of. But whether you look at something like IDC, Gartner, Forrester, or even magazines like CNET, ZNet, ZDNet, and some others I'll mention here in a minute, you can kind of see who the players are in this space. Any device that will let you have some kind of anti-malware / antivirus on it, you should deploy it. And even if you just use the built-in Windows Defender, you can see Microsoft gets pretty good ratings here. It's free. It's already on your device, right? So again, you don't necessarily have to spend money or use another solution there. You got to make sure that's getting updated. Encryption. Use encryption wherever you can. And I know I'm going to be short on time here, but I do want to call something out. For years, people like me said, well, look for the lock, right? When you're online, you're using a website, look for the lock. And while that's still good advice to a point, it creates a false sense of security in some cases, right? Because the lock means your data is being encrypted in transit from your device to the server, but the bad guys know this, and they know people have been told to look for the lock. They'll go out, they'll get a certificate, they'll set up a bogus spoofed website, they'll apply the certificate so that the lock shows up. So my point is, just because you see the lock does not mean a site is secure, right? It's just telling you your data is being encrypted. That said, you should never send any sensitive data to a website that doesn't have the lock because it's not being encrypted and it could be captured in transit. Windows comes with BitLocker. If you have a Windows 10 or 11 machine, and by the way, Windows 10 goes into life in October, you're not going to get any updates after that, turn on BitLocker, encrypt the data on your device, encrypt the data on your phone, right? Whenever possible, use encryption to secure your data. Backup. Never been easier and cheaper to back up data, right? Now, you do need to test your backups to make sure they work, but whether it's what I like to think of as the poor man's backup, Microsoft OneDrive, if you have a 365 account, or something like Google Drive, it's never been easier to at least have another copy of your data somewhere. It's not really backup, but it's better than nothing. Some of you may be familiar with the backup rule of 3-2-1. Sorry, I went too fast there. 3 versions of your data on 2 different media, 1 offsite, right? That's the best advice. Go out and buy an external drive. Set up something like Carbonite, right? Again, use OneDrive. It's never been easier or cheaper to back up your data. You should test your backups occasionally. We have seen many instances where like a ransomware attack hits, someone says, oh yeah, my IT guy has a backup, and then they can't restore from the backup. But again, everything we've talked about here so far, minus the password manager, would cost you nothing if you're on the Windows platform. And I'm not here to push Windows. I'm just telling you, you already have access to all this stuff if you're using a Windows-based machine. You know, I've already sort of got on my soapbox about the Internet of Things. You need to be this guy. Tech enthusiast. My entire house is smart. Tech workers. The only piece of technology in my house is a printer, and I keep a gun next to it so I can shoot it if it makes a noise I don't recognize. And that is absolutely me. Funny, yet poignant and relevant at the same time. Especially since you guys are in tech, I can't strongly encourage you enough to learn about the frameworks that are out there. There are all kinds of tools and frameworks that are free. Okay, I'm a huge fan of the Center for Internet Security, CIS. This is a member organization. Companies like Entrust pay a fee to belong to CIS, which allows us to have access to more advanced tools. But even for free, you can go download the CIS controls. The CIS controls is a set of 156 or 153 rather controls, safeguards that go into explicit detail that's usually easy to understand, especially if you work in tech, about things you should be doing to protect your organization. It's broken down into 3 levels, sort of a beginner level, an intermediate level, and an advanced level. But it's amazingly useful security guidance. It's free. You've got the NIST Center or the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. You've got NIST 800-171. There is a ton of free resources available to you to learn about cybersecurity, learn about things you could be doing to protect yourself, protect your family, protect your organization, and it's free. You just have to know about it. And to that end, you know, so much of this is really about awareness. The bad guys are changing their tactics constantly. They're very smart, they're very creative, they're very devious. And just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. They are out to get you, and they will steal your data. They will steal your money if you make it easy for them. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why I appreciate being able to do these kind of things. I'm trying to raise awareness about this as much as possible, not only to help you as an individual, but so that then you can hopefully help your family, help the organizations you're involved in, and just generally raise awareness about this. I could tell you, you know, as I spent a lot of time in Ohio, because our business is in Ohio and most of our clients are in Ohio, Ohio is light years ahead of Kentucky at a governmental level in terms of training for cybersecurity for local governments, all kinds of programs. I'm trying to get Kentucky to sort of follow suit. So again, I can share more about that with you if you're interested in how you might be able to help with that. But it's absolutely critical to try to stay aware. But I also understand, you know, if you're just a regular person, you don't want to have to know about all this stuff. You don't want to have to do all this stuff. I totally get it. But so many of the things we talked about here tonight, once you get over the initial friction, like when I first started using a password manager for about 2 days, it was incredibly frustrating. I didn't really know what I was doing. It was very frustrating. But, you know, once I got the hang of it, I would never want to go back. It makes my life so much easier and so much better. And I'm vastly more secure because every one of my accounts has an insane password on it, right? In addition to all these other things. So to kind of summarize this here, this is a nice little infographic that touches on many of the key points. So if you don't want to go back to the whole thing, right? Use strong, unique passwords, enable multi-factor authentication, keep your software up to date, use antivirus / anti-malware. We didn't really talk about VPN. I don't ever use public Wi-Fi, ever. If I'm out in public, I use the hotspot on my phone and I use a VPN. I would never use public Wi-Fi. There's just too much risk there. You know, awareness, right? They mentioned public Wi-Fi specifically there. Use a firewall. We didn't really talk about that. Windows has built-in software firewall for your device. Back up your data and then educate yourself. So again, I like this infographic. They did a nice job of kind of summarizing all my key points there. And then finally, before I get to questions here and some of the resources at the end, this is a guy named Mikko Hyppönen. You may have heard of him. He's pretty much an internationally renowned cybersecurity expert. I'm kind of a fanboy because he does a really good job of breaking this stuff down in a way that regular folks can understand. I love this quote: "We're no longer securing computers, we're securing society, because our whole society depends on this stuff." So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. One last great quote here: "Cybersecurity is national security." This is now retired former NSA director and Army General Paul Nakasone. There's me in my tinfoil hat. And like I said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. They are. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of additional resources in here. Here's a bunch of X accounts that are just an absolute awesome resource for this kind of information. Sometimes people ask me, well, Dave, what do you use personally? Because again, I've got the tech stack we use at Intrust. This is the stuff that I use for my own personal Dave Hatter stuff. We could talk about that, or you can ask questions if you want. Here's all my contact information. And yes, this is a test. Who's going to scan this QR code? A little bit about Intrust. And with that, again, I'm happy to answer any questions, comments, snide remarks. What do you got for me?
Dave, that hat looks great on you. Love it.
Well, thank you. Yes.
There were a couple questions as you were going along, and I thank you, first of all, for that overview. I think that was really great. One of the questions in the Q&A, someone was wondering, for those just starting out, if they're looking to pursue cybersecurity as a career, what would be the best way to build a portfolio, like a practical portfolio, or to have things to show as they're entering the job hunt for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say a combination. Again, all my contact information is here. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on X or whatever. I'm happy to try to help you to the extent that I can. And, reach out anytime when you have these kind of questions. Breaking into cybersecurity is really hard. I kind of came at this from an unusual angle of, decades of experience as a software engineer. And I happen to know the founder of Intrust really well, because at one time I owned my own business doing software, and we were sort of complementary businesses. So we would refer business to each other. So it was a little easier for me to kind of make that transition from doing software development into more of a pure cybersecurity play. I bet all of you, if you've looked for jobs in tech, have run into this, where they want you to have like 3 years of experience on a tool that's only been around for 2 years, or just completely unrealistic expectations. And I think that's extremely prevalent in cybersecurity. I've also been an adjunct instructor, both Gateway here in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati State. I hear all the time from students they're having trouble breaking into these things. So to answer the question, I know I'm kind of rambling here. Get hands-on experience with tools. Download something like Wireshark or Nmap. There are all kinds of tutorials online, all kinds of free resources you could use: Coursera, Khan Academy, Black Hills Security. Low cost or free, or just YouTube videos. And learn how to use these tools, so when you get to a point where you're talking to someone in an interview, you can actually demonstrate your capabilities. Now, as you can see, I have a lot of certifications. I've been doing this for a long time. As a consultant, certifications are important, not only because it gives you credibility, it also forces you to learn things you wouldn't learn otherwise. But I want to be really clear to you. While I always encourage people to pursue certifications, and a good entry-level certification for cybersecurity is Security Plus, a certification is not going to get you a job. Just because you got a certification, it will not get you a job. But it does demonstrate discipline. It demonstrates a willingness to learn. It demonstrates a willingness to go above and beyond what other people are doing. And I think if you couple that with demonstrable hands-on experience, you're going to be a lot better off. Hopefully that answers the question.
Susan, yeah, I think that was really helpful. We always say that tech is a show me industry. The employers want to see what you know, not just hear about it. So while kind of like you said, a certification is great, they need to actually see a project or a tool or something.
Let me say something else real quick too, Shannon. Like Nmap, OpenVAS, Wireshark, there's all these different tools you can download for free. Set up test labs in your house, online lab tools where you can simulate things. I just want to remind people, you can't use a tool like Nmap to just go start scanning things on the internet. You may be breaking the law of a given state. So before you just download these tools and go wild using them, be careful and understand what you're doing, so you don't find yourself in legal trouble.
Dave, there was another question in the chat. Tiffany was wondering how she can link data analytics with cybersecurity for a career. So if someone you came from more of the software background, but if somebody has a data background, how could that maybe position them?
Well, that's a good question. And, I don't know that there's as much of a direct translation. Again, for me, from the software angle, if you all have not heard of OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP about every 3 years puts out a list of the top 10 security issues related to web-based applications. The thing is more than 20 years old, and things like SQL injection have been on their list for more than 20 years. SQL injection, for those of you who know about software engineering and SQL, it's a trivial problem to fix, right? You use parameterized queries and/or stored procedures, and the problem goes away. And yet, more than 20 years later, it's still in the top 10 list of software vulnerabilities that, again, impact us all at this point, right? So, I think it was kind of easy for me to see these things over and over and over again and go, well, it feels like because I know a little bit about software, maybe I could transition into this. The data might be harder, but an angle for you might be, right now, there are 19 states that have passed a data privacy law, a consumer data privacy law, including Kentucky, which goes into effect next year. In fact, I like to jibe my Ohio compatriots all the time that for once Kentucky actually beat Ohio with something useful. As more states, there's still no federal privacy law, but as more states adopt privacy laws, some are a lot more rigorous than others, like the California Consumer Privacy Act. There's increasing pressure on businesses to take these things seriously. So you may be able to segue an understanding of data categorization from a privacy angle into security. There is sort of an increasing field of just the privacy aspects of this as well, but usually you kind of see an overlap there between the privacy and security aspects of things. And I think that would, again, I'm kind of speculating here, but I think that might be a way to try to transition, is to focus more around using your skills in data analytics to learn about privacy, data privacy, protecting data, and from the angle of companies are increasingly going to be held to account when data is leaked. And while I'm generally kind of an anti-regulation guy, I'm happy to see more of these data privacy laws on the books because, as consumers, we're just getting crushed out here with this stuff. How many of you have not gotten a letter from some company telling you your data's been breached? I bet there's not a single person in this audience that hasn't gotten at least one. I've gotten 5 or 6 of them, including from companies I've never heard of, because your data is being bought and sold from data brokers behind the scenes from our friends at people like, Meta and Google. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Dave, I thought it was interesting when you brought up the Kettering Health cybersecurity breach, because that's where I was born, at Kettering Hospital several years ago. But yeah,
quite devastating.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any other questions, I'll tell one more quick story if you all have a second.
There are a couple more in the Q&A
Go ahead.
section. One was, we're told to trust our VPN provider, but in a world of increasing data breaches and surveillance, how can a user truly audit or verify a VPN's no logs policy?
Well, that's a good question. To some extent, short of looking for third-party assurance from someone else, that has the right expertise to test it, there is no way. I use Proton for my personal email. I use Proton's VPN. I trust them from everything I've seen. They've never been accused of doing any of the sorts of things you're describing here. I think Nord's a pretty good product. But actually, I said I was going to say something and I didn't, so this is the perfect segue. One of the things you can do as a consumer or someone who may not be real technical, and I try to share this with my family and friends all the time. Not everyone has a nerdy friend around that does this stuff for a living and can answer these kind of questions, right? Well, there's all kinds of great online resources: CNET, CharlieNet, ZDNet, Ziff DavisNet, Tom's Guide, PC Magazine, Consumer Reports, where they'll test these kind of products, right? So if you say as a consumer, well, what's the best endpoint protection for me? Well, if ZDNet says it's these 5 things, and CNET says it's these 5 things, and Tom's Guide says it's these 5 things, and the same thing shows up on all 3 lists, well, that's probably a pretty good product. Every year they'll put out their list. Here's the 25 best, or the 5 best VPNs of 2025. Here's the 5 best antivirus products. So while, they have editors and experts that are digging into these things much more so than the average consumer would. So, that's a good resource for folks who aren't very technical and maybe want to get a little more background into something. But yeah, to some extent, you just have to trust it and or try to find folks like Bruce Schneier. Again, he's a cryptologist, very well-known international expert. See what he's using, right? That sort of thing.
And then Dave, and sorry, I hope everybody can hear me. I got one of the things that notifications that my network's unstable. But one of the last question I'm seeing is, do you think open source development is necessarily better for cybersecurity applications?
Maybe, probably, only because assuming that you're working with code that's being actively maintained, since experts can look at that code and understand what it does versus the black box of some sort of proprietary code like Microsoft. I can't guarantee you in every case. This is another one of my hot button issues, SBOMs, software bill of materials. Having done this for years, I can't tell you how many times I've gone online and I needed some functionality, right? I could try to write it myself, or I could see if somebody's built a widget or something I could use. I find something out there, I download it, I plug it in, I use it. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know if it's got backdoors in it. I have no idea what it might be using, right? So software bill of materials is the idea that every piece of software would show you everything that's in it. And you could trace backwards and understand, hey, a new vulnerability was found in this component, which is in another component, which is in another component, which is in the thing you just downloaded. So I know I've gone off track a little bit here, but open source at least creates the opportunity for other people to look at the software, understand what it does, point out concerns, possible backdoors, and that sort of thing. So I think it has the potential to be more secure, but it also depends on what it is, who's maintaining it, is it continuing to be maintained, and who's doing the analysis on it. So in general, I think, again, the possibility of it being more secure is there, but I don't think just because it's open source that guarantees that it's there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Dave. I think that's all the questions. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us tonight?
Appreciate your time. Again, you're welcome to connect with me. I'm happy to try to help. I talk about this stuff a lot. I share a lot of information about it. You can't know everything about this, so I'm always learning new stuff and trying to put it out there, and hope folks stay aware, stay vigilant. And again, a couple other hot button issues for me: secure by design, the OWASP top 10, and secure software bill of materials. We simply, as we get increasingly dependent on all of this stuff, must have software bill of materials. So unless you have any other questions, that's all I got. Thanks for your time. Appreciate the opportunity. You know where to find me.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks so much, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thanks everybody for attending. I hope you all have a great night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thanks. Have a good one.